It is a story told time and again, a pervasive whisper in the culture, that a mature woman's life, no matter how accomplished, remains incomplete without a romantic partner to validate her existence. This narrative suggests her journey is a quest for a better half, someone to finally make her whole, as if her years of experience, wisdom, and resilience were mere prologues to a story that only begins with another's arrival. We are taught to see her solitude not as a space of potential, but as a void that must be filled. This deeply ingrained belief shapes her expectations, often leading her down paths of compromise and self-abandonment, all in the pursuit of a union that promises to be the final, crowning achievement of her womanhood. But what if this entire premise is flawed? What if the greatest love story she was ever meant to live was not with another, but with the universe of possibilities residing within her own soul? This relentless pursuit of an external counterpart is perhaps the first and most fundamental error. It is the outsourcing of her own completeness, the placing of the key to her happiness in a pocket that is not her own. She is encouraged to mold herself into a more palatable, more desirable version of her being, often sanding down the very edges that make her unique and formidable. The world celebrates the woman who finds a partner, but rarely does it applaud the woman who finds herself, in all her intricate and magnificent solitude. Society's applause becomes a siren's call, luring her away from the vast, uncharted territory of her inner world. The true tragedy is not the absence of a partner, but the potential absence of self that this frantic search can create, leaving her feeling perpetually on the verge of a life that is yet to truly begin. So, the question that we must dare to ask is this: what if the feeling of lack, the sense of being incomplete, has been misinterpreted all along? What if it is not a sign that a person is missing from her life, but rather that a part of herself is waiting to be met, acknowledged, and integrated? This shift in perspective changes everything. It reframes the journey from a desperate search for another into a sacred pilgrimage back to the self. It proposes that the emptiness she might feel is not a void to be filled by external affection, but a sacred space, a silent temple awaiting the return of its rightful occupant. This is where the real work begins, not in the art of attracting another, but in the profound and often challenging art of becoming one's own. The second fatal error is the abandonment of the inner sanctuary, the sacred space within where her truest self resides. In the rush to meet the expectations of others, to be the partner, the mother, the professional, she often forgets the path back to this internal temple. This is the place of her intuition, her untamed creativity, her deepest knowings. When this connection is severed, she begins to source her sense of worth from the outside world, listening to the cacophony of societal demands instead of the quiet, steady hum of her own soul. Her life becomes a performance for an audience that is perpetually unimpressed, leaving her exhausted and disconnected from her own power. She decorates the outer rooms of her life meticulously, but allows the holiest chamber, her own inner world, to fall into disrepair, gathering dust in the silence of neglect. Carl Jung would suggest that this neglect is a form of self-betrayal, a turning away from the self, the organizing principle of the psyche. According to Jung, the journey of the second half of life, the process of individuation, is precisely about this return inward. It is a sacred duty to excavate the lost parts of oneself, to integrate the wisdom gathered through experience, and to build a life that is an authentic expression of this integrated wholeness. When a woman consistently prioritizes the needs and desires of others over the whispers of her own soul, she stalls this crucial developmental process. She remains fragmented, forever seeking wholeness in the reflection of another's eyes, not realizing that the complete picture, the magnificent mosaic of her being, can only be assembled from within the quiet solitude of her own temple. This abandonment manifests as a subtle but persistent feeling of being unmoored, a sense of being a stranger in one's own life. It's the sensation of looking in the mirror and not fully recognizing the person staring back, seeing a composite of roles played rather than a sovereign being. Reclaiming this inner space is not an act of selfishness, but of profound responsibility. It involves carving out time for silence, for reflection, for reconnecting with the passions and dreams that were placed on hold. It is about learning to enjoy her own company, to find solace and inspiration in her own thoughts, and to transform her solitude from a place of perceived lack into a vibrant, thriving cocoon of self-creation and renewal. Her inner world is not a barren wasteland. It is a fertile garden awaiting her attention. The third error, and one of the most profound, is the refusal to engage with her own shadow. The shadow, as Carl Jung termed it, is the repository of all the parts of ourselves that we have disowned, repressed, or deemed unacceptable. Our anger, our ambition, our sensuality, our assertiveness. For many women, these qualities have been labeled as unfeminine or undesirable, and so they are pushed into the darkness of the unconscious. However, what is repressed does not disappear. It gains power in the dark. It projects itself onto others, particularly romantic partners. She finds herself inexplicably drawn to individuals who embody these disowned traits, or she is repeatedly triggered by partners who mirror back to her the very qualities she cannot accept in herself, creating cycles of painful and repetitive relational dynamics. Engaging with the shadow is a courageous act of psychological honesty. It requires a woman to turn and face the aspects of her personality that she has been conditioned to fear and reject. It means acknowledging her capacity for rage as well as for tenderness, her ambition as well as her nurturing spirit, her fierce independence as well as her desire for connection. This process is often uncomfortable, as it involves dismantling the carefully constructed persona of the good woman. She must be willing to sit with her own complexities, to admit that she is not always gentle, not always accommodating, and to find the immense power and creativity locked away within these darker corners of her psyche. This is not about becoming a darker person, but about becoming a more whole one, integrating all facets of her being into a more authentic and powerful whole. When a woman consistently avoids this inner work, her relationships become the stage upon which her unlived life is acted out. She might seek a partner who is powerful and assertive because she has disowned her own power, only to find herself feeling dominated and unseen. Or she might suppress her own needs so completely that she attracts partners who take and never give, leaving her feeling resentful and depleted. The journey into the shadow is the key to breaking these patterns. By reclaiming these lost parts of herself, she no longer needs to seek them in another. She becomes the source of her own strength, her own passion, and her own authority, and can then enter into relationships not from a place of need, but from a place of sovereign wholeness. Have you considered which parts of yourself you might be keeping in the dark? A fourth fatal error lies in the deep-seated confusion between authentic love and anxious attachment. Society often romanticizes relationships born from a desperate need to escape loneliness, a fear of being unseen, or a desire for rescue. This is not love. It is a transaction rooted in lack. In this dynamic, the other person becomes a solution, a remedy for an internal wound. The woman may find herself clinging to a connection that is draining or unfulfilling, simply because the thought of being alone feels more terrifying than the pain of staying. She might tolerate disrespect, emotional unavailability, or a fundamental lack of compatibility, all under the guise of commitment and loyalty. This kind of attachment is a cage, not a sanctuary, and it keeps her from the flight of her own becoming. Authentic love, by contrast, can only arise between two whole individuals. It is not a desperate grasp for completion, but a resonant meeting of two self-sufficient souls. This love does not seek to possess or to fix. It seeks to witness and to celebrate. It thrives in an atmosphere of freedom, where both partners are committed to their own individual growth as much as they are to the growth of the relationship. Carl Jung's concept of individuation is again relevant here. A truly conscious relationship supports the individuation process of both people. It is a union where solitude is not a threat, but a respected necessity. A space where each person can reconnect with their own center before returning to the shared space of the relationship, enriched and renewed. True love does not diminish the self, it expands it. Therefore, the work is to cultivate a profound sense of self-sufficiency, to build a life so rich and meaningful that a partner becomes a wonderful addition, not a desperate requirement. This involves healing the original wounds that drive the anxious attachment, the fear of abandonment, the feeling of unworthiness. It requires her to become her own safe harbor, her own source of validation and comfort. When a woman learns to truly enjoy her own existence, to find joy and purpose within herself, she fundamentally alters her energetic signature. She no longer emanates a frequency of need, but one of wholeness and abundance. It is from this place of profound self-love that she can attract a partner who is a true equal, someone capable of meeting her in the spacious, liberating dance of authentic connection. The fifth and perhaps most pervasive error is the belief that her worth is a reflection in the mirror of another's gaze. From a young age, a woman is often taught that her value is contingent upon her desirability, her ability to attract and keep a partner. This insidious message becomes deeply embedded in her psyche, creating a lifelong quest for external validation. She may achieve incredible success in her career, nurture deep friendships, and cultivate immense wisdom, yet a persistent feeling of not enoughness can linger if she remains single. This dependency on external approval is a fragile foundation upon which to build a life, as it places her emotional stability entirely in the hands of others, subject to their whims, their moods, and their inevitable human imperfections. This relentless search for validation often leads to a pattern of self-abandonment. She might silence her own opinions to be more agreeable, suppress her needs to appear low maintenance, or shrink her own brilliance so as not to intimidate a potential partner. Each compromise is a small betrayal of the self, a chipping away at the magnificent sculpture of her own being. This creates an internal dissonance, a painful split between the persona she presents to the world and the authentic self that lies dormant within. The anxiety that stems from this is immense. She lives in constant fear that if she were to reveal her true, unfiltered self, she would be deemed unworthy of love. She becomes a ghost in her own life, haunting the edges of her own potential, too afraid to fully embody her own light for fear that it might be too bright for others to handle. The journey of true empowerment begins when she consciously decides to withdraw this power of validation from the outside world and reclaim it for herself. It is a radical act of sovereignty. She learns to become her own primary source of approval, to celebrate her own victories, to soothe her own sorrows, and to honor her own truth, even if it is met with misunderstanding. This is the passage from a girl who asks, "Am I worthy?" to a woman who declares, "I am." Her sense of self becomes an unshakable inner pillar, no longer swayed by the presence or absence of a partner. She finds that the most profound and reliable love she will ever experience is the love that flows from her own heart, directed inward. Are you ready to be the sole arbiter of your own worth? If this message resonates, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. When a woman begins to consciously avoid these 5 errors, she does not simply become better at dating. She undergoes a profound and fundamental transformation of her entire being. This is the alchemy of the soul, the turning of the lead of past pain and societal conditioning into the gold of self-realization. The process is often challenging, a journey through the disorienting landscapes of her own psyche. She must confront her deepest fears, grieve the old narratives she once clung to, and learn to sit in the uncomfortable space of the unknown. This is the chrysalis phase, a period of internal dissolution where everything she thought she knew about herself and about love is called into question, a necessary disintegration before the emergence of a new form. This is where she truly meets herself, perhaps for the first time. In the quiet of her own being, free from the noise of external expectations, she uncovers her own rhythms, her own desires, her own non-negotiable truths. She learns to parent her own inner child, to champion her own dreams, and to draw boundaries that honor her energy and her peace. Her life begins to fill with a richness that is self-generated. She cultivates passions, builds community, and creates a world that is a vibrant reflection of her own soul. Her happiness is no longer a destination contingent on another's arrival, but becomes the very path she walks, each step taken with intention and a deep sense of purpose. She is no longer a character in someone else's story. She becomes the author of her own. From this process, a new archetype emerges, the sovereign woman. She is whole unto herself, a complete circle. Her presence is powerful not because it is loud or demanding, but because it is deeply rooted in her own truth. She moves through the world with a quiet confidence that is magnetic, not because she is seeking to attract anyone, but because she is so unapologetically herself. When she does choose to enter a relationship, it is from a place of want, not need. She does not look for a man to complete her, but for a partner to share in her already complete world. She becomes, in her wholeness, beautifully dangerous to the status quo, a testament to the profound power that is unleashed when a woman finally comes home to herself. Reflecting on this journey, one must ask, have you been searching for a savior, when all along you were meant to be your own? Have you been looking for a home in the heart of another, while leaving the rooms of your own soul empty and unattended? These questions are not meant to induce guilt, but to gently illuminate a new path, a new way of being. This path is not about rejecting love, but about redefining it. It is about understanding that the quality of love you can receive from the outside is directly proportional to the quality of love you cultivate on the inside. The world is saturated with stories of finding the one, but the most transformative love story is the one about becoming the one for yourself. This journey of awakening can feel solitary at times. It is a departure from the well-trodden path, and those who walk it are often pioneers of consciousness, forging a new paradigm for what it means to be a woman in the world. As you begin to embody this new truth, you may be met with confusion or resistance from those who are still operating under the old paradigms. But know this: every step you take towards your own sovereignty creates a ripple effect, giving other women permission to do the same. If this exploration has stirred something within you, consider subscribing to the channel to continue this conversation, for these are the discussions that have the power to reshape our collective future. You are not alone in this. You are part of a silent, powerful rising of women who are remembering their intrinsic worth and reclaiming their inner authority. This path is not a rejection of partnership, but the most sacred preparation for it. It is about becoming so deeply rooted in your own being that when love does come, it comes to meet a queen in her own kingdom, not a beggar at the gate. Welcome to your awakening. This is not an end, but the most profound of beginnings. Welcome home.